Welcome to another episode of In Dialogue. And today I'm really happy to have Dr. Shauna, Dr. P.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you say a couple things about you and about your practice?
Yeah, so I'm Shauna Pollard. I'm a licensed psychologist. I live in Atlanta, and I'm licensed in Atlanta, licensed in Georgia and Maryland, but then I also have the PsyPact, so I can see people in up to about 42 states at present. I am a busy lady. I have a private practice where I see clients who are navigating the intersection of neurodivergence and mental health. I have run a group for BIPOC clinicians, so that's Black, Indigenous, and persons of color therapists with ADHD. So our next group is going to be in February 2026. Shameless plug. I also will sometimes run notes and networking events for the BIPOC therapist community. I speak to companies and organizations about the intersection of neurodivergence and mental health, and for some organizations, culture, burnouts, all things related to managing ADHD. Um, and let's see, is that everything? That's the
Well,
most important stuff for now.
I am sure there's more as we find this out, but I need to tell a little anecdote about how I met Dr. P. Shauna. How do people widely refer to you?
Anything. I mean, so you can call me Shauna. I always tell my clients to call me Dr. P or Dr. Pollard, or that's
Okay. Well,
really.
because I asked this because often get asked that question, and I've been trying to gear people to call me what feels like a connection and what feels right. So some people do the Dr. G and Dr. Fritz and whatever. But let's jump into you say you're in 42 states,
Yeah.
and you and I met on a training where I think 50 states or 49 states were represented. I think we were in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And I think we had seen each other before in online communities, but that was the first time we were in the same space. And so part of what I love about this podcast that I do with Sanaa here is that it is connecting us with the community beyond our immediate surroundings. We're 5, 6 years after or into the pandemic and the experience of now really being online and everything. And we are having the opportunity of being in dialogue with clinicians from all around. And so I wanted to like set that context a little bit, talk about how in a room, in a class with like 70 plus people, there was a point at which I said to myself, I don't know how the universe is going to conspire, but I'd like to be working with Dr. P in some kind of shape or form because some of the questions you would ask, some of the things that you would bring up during the training, I was like, I want to work with her. And so we have already crossed paths in the brain spotting world, and we're doing that work together. And then now we are here with one of my closest and trusted journey travelers, Sanaa Hyder, and we're doing this podcast. So Sanaa always asks the most provocative questions to get us going. So I'm going to stop talking and just again say welcome to the podcast, Shauna.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Seems like a really important offering for the
Oh,
community.
I know what I did forget. It was a prior training you and I might have also been in, and I was again in a room with like 70 plus people, and there was a lot of BIPOC power in that room. Were you in
Hmm.
the New Orleans thing?
No, I wish I was. I wanted to go.
Okay. Well, the same experience I had when we physically first met, which is there's a lot of wisdom in all of us,
Hmm.
and we are discovering and rediscovering that wisdom as we go along. And so part of what we'd love to have ourselves in this conversation with you, because you're the guest, so I'm going to stop talking, is the wisdom that can come from just being with one another in this space. So on that note, Tana, go ahead. Ask one of your incredible questions.
Shauna, you said a lot of things. You are busy. You've been doing a lot of things, and I'm really interested in your BIPOC clinicians ADHD group. Could you say a little bit about um, how you've come together and like what has emerged out of doing this group.
Yeah, so I started the group because I actually was sort of new into having a solo practice and just kind of exploring, what are some ways to diversify my the types of work I did. I knew I didn't want to see clients for 100% of the time. And so, but I so or do individual therapy. And so I was offering a group for ADHD clients. And then as I started telling therapists, they would say like, wait a minute, like we need a group like that for us. People who I did not know had ADHD at all, maybe who didn't know I had ADHD in our previous relationships or connections. And so I had a group of peers that I was consulting with that I had met through another therapist thing, which included folks who are international. But it was a clinicians of color group, and they were like, "Well, why don't you start a group for Black women with ADHD?" And then I posted to a group of Facebook peers, and then they were like, "Well, why don't you broaden it?" And I was like, "Okay." And so then that was how the group was born. And we've always been small, like 3 to 5 participants, and so
Mhm.
the group is like 6 sessions, and so me being the researcher that I am, who doesn't get to use research skills all the time, or I guess I do, but maybe in an informal way, I was like, all right, what are best practices? And so I would look through and see what like were the struggles of ADHD clinicians and what things people needed help with most. Anyone I knew, I would kind of poll. And then I put together a group. And so it was a 6 week group, and I had like a rough outline, but in ADHD fashion, we always jump across different topics, and whatever the group needs is where we go. And so we've had folks from like East Coast, West Coast, Texas area. And just, it's a really wonderful space, I think, for people to be able to talk about ADHD, this diagnosis that for many folks of color comes later in life. Most of the folks in the group aren't getting diagnosed as children. They're learning about ADHD at the same time as they're becoming clinicians or after they've become clinicians and having to figure it out on the job. And so, like as we know, being a clinician involves a lot of moving parts, especially if you have
Yeah.
a solo practice. And so I had been in a group practice for like 6 years prior to that. And so I had gone through as a 1099. So I had gone through a lot of like, oh, need to get like the finances straight or need to learn how to do notes and all of that. And so I'm like, well, why not teach other people how to, put those things in place behind the scenes? And then there's also a place for people to connect and have certain conversations about, experiences in the field and just growth and where people want to go in a safe, vulnerable space. I asked, do people want to open it up to be non-BIPOC? And the answer, for the most part, is a resounding no, because it feels safe to be in communities where the identity is centered, as opposed to where it's maybe an afterthought, or maybe it feels like it won't be discussed or given space.
Yeah, tell me more about this intersectionality and what is it like for folks to come in to this group and to suddenly be around people where, like you said, this diagnosis might be coming later, and you're all clinicians, and you share this cultural piece that is supposed to be front and center. So what is the vibe of the group as everybody is coming in and landing in the space?
I think it's just a gratefulness, like, I feel like the word unpacking comes to mind, just being able to settle in and like relax. And everybody has different experiences because everyone is from different communities and different backgrounds. But I think what's in common, and it's something that came up in the brain spotting training with Fritz, was just like a lot of times culture doesn't get the center stage in psychology and becoming a therapist, and which is maybe different if you come from a background where it's woven through everything in your life, and then you go through a training where it's a diversity class where it's like I'm black, you're white. Like, how does that make you feel in therapy? So I think people want a more robust, a more meaty experience of bringing all of themselves to the table. I feel like that was something that people consistently said that they were able to do in the group.
That sounds really like such a, you said, you know, like people can unpack their stuff. It sounds like such a relief to be able to find a group like this and to be able to get some like recognition
Yes.
that this is what they've been going through. Yeah.
Yeah. Was gonna say, talking about unpacking stuff, as someone that had only been trained and educated in white spaces for pretty much all, not even most of, but all of my education, it wasn't until the last 4 or 5 years where I started going to BIPOC trainings that I would actually discover I had a lot of stuff I didn't even know about that was all of a sudden coming to the surface. And I'm wondering if you've had in any of the trainings you've been in, or have you noticed anybody kind of realizing something that they never realized was there? You speak to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was such a gradient of folks who had maybe done a lot of work around culture and folks who hadn't really thought that much. It just was a part of their life. And so I know that was some of the feedback. It was like, oh, it made me really think about like what it's like to, what my own experience, my own journey through the educational and like you said, for me, I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood and county. Uh, County, maybe not. School, definitely. School system from like about fourth grade to 12th. And so I had a very, I would say, not diverse. I mean, you could say diverse because the Black community is diverse. But, and then I went to college, that was a PWI, and then I went to grad school. So I have sort of teetered back and forth between both worlds. And so I feel like for me, it was I was very aware of maybe what was not present or being the only, especially I think in different areas, maybe when you're in a grad program and you're like one of eight and you don't necessarily agree. I don't know. I feel like I always had like both at the same time, like done diversity work. Like I was in a diverse lab for grad school, and we did work looking at like best practices of minority student achievement. That was my grad research. So I feel like my identity was very centered there, even though I was in a program that was predominantly white. And then the fellowship program I had was very diverse. So I feel like I've always had like through my educational process, at least from college and beyond, a toe in each, world.
Yeah.
And so which has its pros and which has its challenges. And so what you find is that there's a lot of diversity where some folks have not had, some folks have been solely in one world or so. And I think the group pulls for people who certainly have not been in worlds where the educational spaces where their experience has been centered, as opposed to like someone who went to HBCU. I actually
Yeah.
don't get a lot of those folks in the group, probably because they have had their culture centered already
Yeah.
and have those networks and those peer groups.
One of the things I'm remembering in those spaces, because again, coming from exclusively white, um, educated spaces, where I actually thought I had a pretty good experience. I guess I was lucky in that way. But then I come into a BIPOC space. In some trainings, they ask you to come in with issues. And so prior to that, I would come in with issues like, oh, I'm anxious about this, or I got to tackle this public speaking thing, or I'm nervous about writing this thing. I would bring in those issues, and then I get into a BIPOC space, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I have never once thought about talking about fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And I think that's the
Yeah.
kind of discovery. It's like I didn't even know that I didn't know. I didn't even know that I wasn't bringing issues to the meeting, issues that were really impacting me. But then I get into that space, that predominant that BIPOC space, and I hear other people talk. I was like, we could talk about that. I didn't know that was even on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about that feeling I've been having? I
Oh,
have I have that same experience. I've also been in mostly white spaces, and especially in my education and training. And it is in training spaces where there have been more BIPOC clinicians where I have realized that, oh, I have things going on inside of me that are not about, to your point, Fritz, like it's not about just daily anxieties, but there are things that I can say that. I
Yeah.
can ask that question. I can reveal this thing about myself.
Didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or I didn't know that that's actually something that is pointing to a symptom that's bigger than me. It's not me. That was really awakening. And so I feel I'm kind of new to this space of wanting to speak more openly or look at things, and it's kind of turned my world kind of upside down. But it's been the most amazing thing to kind of take off this lens
Yeah.
that I've had and like see things more clearly. And so when you talk about your experience, it does sound very unique. Um,
Yeah, I feel like all of my experiences within PWIs have also had a parallel experience where I was also like embedded in BIPOC or Black spaces at the same time. So I feel like I had a different experience where I knew I would feel like I'm the only one seeing this. Like I'm the only one seeing these trends with my clients, but I don't have anyone to talk to about this because no one else has had my background or my experience in a case consultation group per se. And so for me, it was like I think being in the brain spotting space that was by I think I had done a lot of until I started my own practice. Most of my trainings, my therapy, my clinical trainings had been largely white trainings. And so I think it wasn't until I started my own practice that I could sort of integrate
Mhm.
my like lived experiences with my clinical, and that all of a sudden I did have Black peers to easily reach out to or talk to about cases. And for me, that was like such a game changer. And then I think even being at the brain spotting space added such richness because I think like I was familiar with the Black experience, but I wasn't as familiar with like some of like the Asian experiences that were coming. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so interesting and so fascinating, and or the indigenous experiences and so rich. And you see um, both the similarities in terms of certain things that cut across like maybe immigrant cultures or first generation cultures, um, and or more you know, communal cultures that maybe aren't reflected in the trainings that are more like, I don't know, like general or generic, we should say.
yeah. For therapists who are listening, or for clinicians, or for folks who are in private practice, I think you're saying something that might resonate so much, Shauna, which is that you might have experiences in your own work or in your own life that it doesn't feel safe enough to bring to other people, like whoever supervising you or other clinicians. And you have created your own space now where
Yes,
people can
spaces. I have so many
spaces.
spaces now.
That's amazing. I think that so I work online exclusively. I see
Same.
my clients online, and when I do group work, it's online. And when I meet with my peers, it's usually online, like like this. And so I'm curious to know, how have you created so many spaces that fulfill your needs and your desires for not only professional work, but desires to be seen as a full human also?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Like, I didn't have this question advanced, but I was reflecting on this because I had been at a therapist retreat this past weekend. And I was like, how did I get to this point in my career? Like, from a research perspective, like, what are the factors that have the biggest impact? And one thing I was looking at was like when I was about to start my practice, I joined a coaching program for therapists, and it was during the pandemic. And so I feel like it was just the right place, the right time that like everybody was into online stuff because we weren't going anywhere. We, couldn't go anywhere. And so like I think the attendance, the energy, the robustness of doing things online was just stronger. But I think when I was reflecting, I was thinking it was even before that. Like I had worked in the group practice. It had three locations. I was one of the few people who had worked at all three locations, so I knew like everybody. So I was just like, I think I've always been a group person and a joiner, and like I like to bounce ideas. Maybe it's the like verbal processing part of like, my energy or the ADHD side of me that like likes to talk through things with people. And so I think I gravitate toward those opportunities, but then I probably also use them in a way that like maybe other people who are not joiners would like people probably just show up for the basics and go home. Not me. I'm like, yeah, let's do like the meetings, like let's do extra meetings. Like there are people from the coaching group who I still meet with some of them, and that was back in 2021 or 2022. And those were some folks I went to the retreat with. So, like, I have taken opportunities that maybe were meant to be short term or brief or time limited. And then I've met people where the energy was so good, we just kept meeting and just kept meeting. And, sometimes I'm like, all right, like, you're doing way too many meetings. You need to, like, step out. But for me, the other thing I realized when I was reflecting is part of my growth has been because the more clinicians I meet with, the more ideas that I get about best practices and best techniques and things to try.
Mm.
And so, like, I just might be meeting with, and they're like, yeah, well, why don't you try this? Or I'm doing this.
Ooh,
And I'm
could you share some of
like,
those
and
with
well, even like brain spotting, I think like I had done phase one, uh, I think around the same time, like 2021, 2022. And then I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna ride on this for a while. But then I met some neurodivergent peers at a retreat, and a lot of them were using brain spotting, and I was like, hmm, like so
Mm.
neurodivergent folks like brain spotting, and they were like, oh yeah. And so I was like, okay, like, and they were like, yeah, you should definitely go to the training, like with David Grand. And I was like, okay. I was thinking about it, but I was like, oh no. And so, like, they nudged me to, so it's just stuff like that. Like, I think meeting with folks and just like, I guess because I'm a person that probably talks openly about problems and challenges, and I'm always looking to like improve and support clients better. I think for me, working with neurodivergent clients and or BIPOC clients, I feel like those are two populations that don't get seen, and don't get like feel like they're not getting what they need from the world and from life. And I'm like, I'm motivated to give people the best possible treatment experience. So I feel like if I feel like I'm not doing something or I'm missing something in an area, I'm like, all right, let me figure out how to, so I'm like, yeah, I'm struggling with this, or, and then people are like, oh, well, I'm doing this, and I'm like, oh, really? Tell me more. So I feel like it's just like the combination of being in community with other people who are excellent and great and really passionate about the work and like therapy and being a therapist, and then also just finding the right opportunities, the right groups. And then when I'm in those groups, like, cultivating connections that keep going. And like with Fritz, like I could have just saw him at the training and was just like, hey, nice to meet you, like whatever. But it's just the like, let's keep in contact. Like you seem interesting, you seem like you're doing really cool work. I want to stay in connection. And then I think the next thing you know, like we're on a podcast like months later. So I think it's the combination of the fact that I do like people, I like connecting, but I want my clients to have the top of the line experience. And I think for me, I see the weaknesses in generic experience and that they don't always meet the needs of BIPOC or neurodivergent clients. And so I think ever since I started being a clinician, I recognize I have to go outside.
yeah.
I was the evidence-based treatment postdoc. And even then, I was like, I'm still gonna have to tweak these treatments or break them down or make them more relatable to my clientele. And so that I think started the journey, I guess, going into private practice maybe, because I did that like within a year of like finishing my postdoc. And so I think for me, it's like I'm gonna have to modify everything and tweak everything and personalize and specialize everything. And it's like I need help because I need to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
Often Sanaya and I were talking, and we will have moments where we remind ourselves, one of us will say it, this is really hard work that we're doing. This
Yeah.
is a really hard job we've picked, and the doing this work as a profession, and I really believe we are doing it as a vocation, requires ongoing learning, support, and we are also experiencing tons of vicarious trauma where we need to be in connection with one another. Healing happens in community. And it has been my experience in all that you described that when in a room full of, 70 plus people, so now you just got to witness why it was easy to pick Shauna out and go, ooh, I see a future of some level of connecting there because also I could see this person was doing a lot of things and interesting work, but you're not just learning things at a superficial level, you're learning them, applying them, and then seeing where it is lacking, and then continuing to go and learn more, and then to connect to other people and to connect with the ideas and to share in those ideas and to be in dialogue like this, which is something we could do all day long if we didn't have to go work and do other things. But, so very much appreciate having met you and had the opportunity to bring you into the podcast. This is the end here. We're just going to do more, and we're going to continue to do this podcast with all kinds of journey travelers in our world. But yeah, I'm just gonna be in this moment for a second and take that in.
Yeah, I I love, Shauna, how you said that you're taking things that are generic and specializing them. And I think I love the idea of being invited into a group like that as a clinician, as a human. And it's a great invitation for those who are pondering doing that kind of thing to, to add groups or coaching groups to their practices. I'm curious to know, like, really, like, tangibly. I'm so curious. Like, I want to be in the group. I want to be in it. I want to be in one of your groups. But I'm curious to know when you say you take something that is sort of generic and turn it into something that is so much more significant for the folks who are in the group. Could you give me one example of something that that is like that, that's more specialized?
Um, Okay, so one thing I created for the people, one thing I struggled with in the early years of private practice was finances. Like, oh my God, like, and even now when I was explaining to one of my good friends, she was like, that sounds like a lot. I'm like, yeah, like, we never know how much we're gonna make every month. Like, we don't get paid always in real time, especially if you take insurance, you're not getting paid in real time. And even when you're doing projects for people, like, it's always up in the air. And so I was like, how do you she's always like, you're doing good. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen next month. And so I kind of created an Excel sheet that I had like it was loosely based off of something I had seen, but I designed it like first I started using it for myself. So just to like map out like how to estimate like what I'm gonna make every month, and then it has tabs for each month, and then it has like, budgeting for like time off and vacation because we just don't think about those things. I feel like when I got started, it was just like just work and just try to make enough money. And really, when you're doing the like Fritz said, this is this career involves a lot. So you really need like when you're thinking about how much you make, you really need to factor in like paid like time off, which is unpaid. And you need to factor in like fluctuations, like what's the minimum you want to make, and then you really need to overshoot that, and then you want to start to think about things like your retirement, but then you're also thinking about like your personal expenses, but also your business expenses, which again also fluctuate depending like is your liability insurance due? It's like goodness, like well, that wasn't the bill I was expecting. So even though I should have, because they sent me the email like 2 months in advance, right? So one of the things I did was like create a Excel file for people to use. Now, some of the people, many of the people don't use it, but someone used it and they were like, you know what? Actually, like I don't know if private practice is where I need to be because I need to be making more than this and I need a little more continuity, right? But I think it's good to know that even if it's an uncomfortable truth. And so one of the things I'm always about is facing money because I find a lot of folks are avoidant about money and are like, "Ooh, I'm not gonna look at it. I don't want to look at it." And then like when it smacks you in the face, you have to look at it. So I try to like get people to have those conversations and like take a look at their own money and just be thinking about like that aspect of being a business owner because we know like the challenge with being a therapist entrepreneur is that you have to put on two hats, actually like 700, but we'll just say
Yeah,
two for now. Like one of them is the business owner, right? And like that person is like, I need to make more than I'm spending. And I need to do that consistently over time. I need a plan for that. And I need to be able to weather the ups and downs of external factors that impact running a business. And then you have to put on the hat where you're the therapist and you're
yeah,
warm and kind. And sometimes, sometimes you push back or sometimes you're a little bit, edgy with clients, but and you have to be able to play those two roles. And sometimes people just are want to play the therapist role, but it's like
that's
if you run
right.
a
Yeah,
business, you have to play both.
yeah, right. Being a therapist is running a small business.
hmm
Yeah,
Nobody prepares us for that. Like in our, at least for me, I've never heard a single person that I've met say that their school program taught them how to be an entrepreneur and how to be a therapist, which is wild because so many people do go
As,
to private
as
school.
someone who tried to bring that into the program that I'm teaching in right now, I was told by the program director I wasn't allowed to bring that into the training program.
So
That's
now we see it comes from the top.
Yeah,
Mhm.
comes from the top or but they explained to me it actually is the school's research institutions are chartered or accredited to do that. And if you start doing anything that has to do with the business of the profession, you're doing trade school work and
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. It was a very honest moment with a colleague that was honest, but in that moment, as I tried to bring in the business of it. I was wondering whether in your journeys, both recent and distant past, is there things that you now know about yourself that you did not know? What you discover about yourself? Can you name anything that just kind of like I didn't anything?
You want me to go first?
Yeah,
Well,
you're the guest.
this weekend it came up that I kind of think of myself as like quiet, like well behaved, kind of meek and mild, and everyone pushed back on that. They were like, who is this person?" So I think about it in terms of parts. I'm not trained in IFS or formally trained in parts work, but I like the conceptualization. I feel like I have this part that maybe, in response to, you know, this idea that I'm supposed to be this way, that I'm supposed to be compliant and well behaved and so I feel like I aspire to that role. But then there's this other part of me that's like, no, I don't like that. I don't agree with that, or I have questions, and I think that's the part that makes me not so well. And then I think there is a little part of me that's mischievous and likes to kind of like, you know, poke a little bit and play a little bit. I always tell people when I was training interpersonal therapy, IPT, and one of the tools from that is role play. And so I was telling someone I'd love to do a good role play with clients, and I like to be the bad guy. So I'm like, all right, who's the person in your life that you need to set a boundary with? Like, because after I've been seeing them for a while, I kind of know the
Yeah.
personality of that person. So I say I'll be the bad guy and you be you and let's go. And you try to set a boundary. And I think sometimes they're shocked about how much of a bad guy. But they're like, no, you pretty much got it. You pretty much nailed it. So yeah, I guess that's the part of me that likes to be a little mischievous. So yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Mischievous and um, I like non-compliant too because I think that um, without non-compliance, you don't get to have rich community experiences based on what people actually need.
Yeah, and I think I've struggled a lot with that. I think people who know me well can't see the compliant part anymore, or the part that is trying to be well behaved because I've let down the mask with them. But I
Mm.
feel like it's something that especially was relevant for me as a Black clinician where I'm like, I know I'm supposed to be doing this, but I'm just gonna do this. But like I'm just not gonna talk about the fact that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But I would feel guilt about it or shame. I think that's one thing that the brain spotting training really helped just to see how many other peers are doing the same thing or thinking the same things and kind of pushing the envelope or like, no, that doesn't work for us. Or even just to have David say, like, you know, no, the what is um recommended is not always accurate or relevant. So I think for me, I still wrestle with like that sense of like but I'm supposed to be doing this. Like this is the right thing to do, even though I might be doing this other thing that like it feels more accurate and feels more relevant for
Yeah.
the population.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you're saying that because I think that people need to hear that.
Yeah.
And I have other therapists ask me questions like this all the time, which is it okay to do this thing that I'm thinking about? Or is it okay to do that? Is it not right? It won't, is it not approved to do this thing? And I go, According to whom?" And I think that what you're saying is suggesting something similar that we're doing what is, or in your groups, you're doing what is more right for those who need it based on the culture of the group and what's necessary. And that is so much more important and better and safer in the space than things that might not actually work in real life for real
Mhm.
humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am continually having that experience where when I'm in community with other therapists, I find myself finding out even more how much the system had colonized me into a box. And there are so many times with fellow journey travelers in this work and in this podcast and talking to people like yourself that give me courage and inspiration to do more as opposed to restrict myself even more so. So, I mean, that is a thing that we need to hear. I don't think we can get enough of it because constantly our systems, our education and our systems and our licensing board, all of those things are all about constriction. And I know for years that I was writing with a low level of generalized anxiety and guilt over all the things that I was subtly rebelling against. Like, I don't really like the DSM. I don't like the labeling that much. And why is that the case? And it's only in recent years where I'm like, oh, I can see why. I can feel why. Actually, I can not only see why, but in this kind of community and this type of work, I can feel why. And I'm finding in in sessions with clients now, whenever they bring in something that the world has pathologized and made not okay, but that's a feeling and experience they have. If I can just get with them to be okay. Is it okay right now if we're just with that feeling? Even if that feeling right now is, I don't want to live anymore, I want to end my life. Well, would it be okay just to be with that feeling? we can just be here together with it. And what used to take sometimes 3 to 6 months to have people feel better in that kind of dynamic, they're telling me by the next session that was very powerful to have created that space to be with whatever was coming up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really powerful to hear that because I definitely started my career in a setting where it's like once you hear that, it's like you're about to have to file a lot of paperwork, like intense. And it can transform you from being in the moment and just giving people what they really need when you're worried about like my license and following the rules and following the procedures. And like it's so tough because I feel like for a lot of us there's this fear about like what are the consequences for breaking the rules? What if it all goes wrong? Because sometimes it is an intuitive thing to do that and to take that position, like, I'm just gonna be here with them, or I'm just gonna do something that like isn't like permitted. Or I think in private practice it feels easier because there aren't as many rules, but I think people in settings, community, mental health, and all of that break rules all the time too. So I think it's just hard, because the field just it's so much about liability and sometimes you can get distracted from the work.
Mhm.
Oh, that's so right. That feels so right in my bones when you say it. That there's intuition that can be lost when you are afraid or feeling guilt for not following the system.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
remembering Eduardo Duran's book, Healing the Soul Wound, and there's a section in there where he talks about a client who came in with the suicide spirit with him, and he treated it like it was a spirit, and that he created in the space of the session, created space for that spirit to just be with, maybe, and to even ask that spirit in terms of its own motivations were around just trying to transition away from the pain and suffering that the client was experiencing. Just a
Mhm.
very like nothing in any of my training um, had that kind of space creation for um, my experience was in clinical settings where there was hyper rules and everything like that, but to actually create space for that, I literally have had just clients repeatedly say that was really helpful. I still have the feelings, but not the way I did before. And we want to, I believe we want to really help in the groups that we're creating, provide that community for our other therapist friends who sometimes are in their own private practices or in clinical practices dealing with that stuff alone and carrying that pit in their stomach all the time, worrying when, we could, with our ideas and with our experiences and our anecdotes, give them what they need to feel what they need so that they can go back and do this very hard work that we've chosen to do as a profession.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just hear the creativity in that response, and it makes me think that like that is the danger of the field that like is so pushing like compliance, and one way to be is that we lose our spark and our our the thing that makes us us. And I feel like clients love that. They like love the relatability. They like when I bring in like random metaphors, like you know suppose I ran into you in the street and did, like people like that, like personality, the fire. It makes them want to connect with you and see you as a person, and I think that leads to people feeling comfortable opening up. So I think even getting away from this idea of like disclose, and I've grown so much. Like when I was in uh training, like you obviously you don't disclose. And then like once I went into private practice, someone's like, you should tell people you have ADHD. I was like, no. And I was like, nobody needs to know that. That's nobody's business. But slowly I started to find little spaces of disclosure. And so for me, I think about, I still think about when is disclosure helpful for the client versus just helpful for me. But I find that like people will say, I saw that and it made me want to reach out to you, or like,
Right.
it's helpful to see you doing this. And I think for the therapist group, it's been supremely helpful to see like, hey, she has ADHD, she's running a business too, and she's making things happen. And it's not the uh, death knell or the sentence that people uh, claim it to be sometimes. And so I think it is like people like some disclosure. I think it makes you human. So I try to, when it makes sense and when it's reasonable, like disclose a little bit.
People can sense when they're not in the room with a full human or a human that's withholding their humanity.
Hmm.
Whether they intellectually know it or not, they can feel it. The musicians and artists I've worked with have told me that. They've told me, I got to check the vibe. And vibe is not something you can intellectually create, but you can quite reliably create it with being fully present,
Hmm. Yeah.
keeping it real, as they would say.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. P, for being here with us. I feel like you should come back and we could do a whole rewrite of the ethics of being a human therapist.
I mean, but the thing is, I've met so many clients, so many other therapists who are doing this, and I feel like they inspire me. So, I think the key is like really just tapping into that network of fiery therapists who are like, doing the work of like being fully human and being a therapist at the same time.
I love that.
Amazing.
Find fiery therapists.
Keep it real.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be here.